Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to the Chairman of the Financial Services Committee, a gentleman who's devoted a large part of his career to fighting discrimination and prejudice in the workplace, Barney Frank from Massachusetts.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I am impressed by the sincerity of the gentleman from Washington's advocacy on behalf of people who are transgender. And I hope as we contemplate this strategy today, people will fully examine that. I regret the fact that there do not appear to be the votes in this House to include people who are transgender. And I am struck by the eagerness, frankly, of some people to use that group as a weapon with which to defeat the whole bill, because these are people who are opposed not only to the inclusion of people who are transgender, but who have historically been opposed to including any protection for people at all. I'll yield to the gentleman.
Well, listen, I thank the gentleman for yielding. If the gentleman was listening to my remarks, I know he came in, unfortunately, after I had started making my remarks, but my whole point was suggesting that we have a process here where we can dispose of the measure either for or against. That's all I'm saying.
I take back my time. No, that's not all. That's all the gentleman said. But the effect would be to try to undermine the bill. When people who are opposed to the basic bill and opposed to the amendment lament the chance not to vote on an amendment which would undermine the bill, people should understand where we are. I filed the bill that included people who are transgender.
He's not on a real screen.
Earlier this year, I was very proud when this House passed a hate crimes bill, which explicitly included people who are transgender. My recollection is the gentleman from Washington voted against that. We are in the following situation in this country. We have had prejudices of various sorts. Sadly, prejudice increases as difference increases. We have made progress in, I believe, disputing the prejudice against people like myself who are gay. We have not, lamentably, made as much progress in people who are transgender. I agree that the argument is there for including everyone. I agree that there was an argument for including legal immigrants in the S-chip bill. The question we have is this. If we do not have the votes to go forward with as much as we would like to do we then abandon any effort? And do we allow those who are opposed to any progress at all in the anti-discrimination fight in this area to use a particular group as a way to prevent progress? Mr. Speaker, I've been voting on anti-discrimination measures for 35 years since I first joined the legislature. And I have voted repeatedly to extend the protection to groups of which I am not a member, based on ethnicity, based on race, based on disability, based on age. I'm now a beneficiary of the age one, but I wasn't when I voted for it. And I wish we had the votes in this House to ban discrimination.
Time's expired.
I'd ask for an additional.
I yield an additional 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I wish we had the votes to ban discrimination of all sorts. I also wish that I had as much energy today as I did when I voted to ban age discrimination when I wasn't eligible. I wish I could eat more and not gain weight. I wish a lot of things, but I will not act on my wishes irresponsibly. I hope we will go forward today and do as much as we can. I believe that if we are able to muster the votes to tell millions of Americans who are gay and lesbian that they are not bad people, that it is not legitimate to fire them simply because of who they are, the message we send to those people, the message we send to high school students who go to school each day fearing the kind of torment that they will confront, that will be the most significant advance we have made in fighting prejudice since the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I wish we could do more. And if we are able to do this, I will continue my efforts to do more. I am glad to see a lot of recruits now to the effort to protect people with transgender. I wish they were there when many of us were fighting that many years ago. I'd ask for 15 more seconds.
I yield 15 seconds.
And I will make this prediction, that if we go forward today and adopt legislation that bans discrimination based on sex orientation, but does not ban discrimination based on gender identity, Some of us will continue the fight to protect people based on gender identity, and many of those seeking to use that issue today will be our opponents as we go forward trying to do it.
Time expired. The gentleman from Washington.
I give myself 30 seconds, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
I appreciate my friend from Massachusetts for yielding to me and at least entering in a brief exchange where I was trying to explain my position based on the procedure and the rule. He took back his time and while I think he may have conceded that that's what I was talking about, he said something to the effect, that's not what you meant. Now I think he's expanding what my thought process is, but I do appreciate the gentleman for at least yielding to me. So with that, Mr. Speaker, no, yeah, I will yield to the gentleman.
I simply wanted to point out that this proposal that we be allowed to vote on this issue comes from people who are opposed to it in all regards and who understand that the effect of that procedure would be to undermine our ability to make any progress at all.
Reclaiming my time. I have a great deal of respect for the gentleman from Massachusetts, and he is one chairman that regularly, I give myself another 30 seconds. He regularly comes to the Rules Committee and wants to have a full and open debate. And I think that the gentleman would have to concede that this is a very unusual step where we are self-billing into the rule an opportunity to deny a vote on an amendment that was made in order. That is contrary to what I've heard the gentleman say many times.
The gentleman yield?
Sure, I'd be happy to yield.
Yes, the rule gives the opportunity to the supporters of including transgender inclusion the right to make a decision, not its opponents.
Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I give myself 15 seconds. This is a very, very unusual procedure. And the whole point of a body like the United States Congress is to debate and dispose of issues. We are being denied that under the rule. I yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Brown-Waite.
The lady from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in opposition to H.R. 3685, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, and the rule that we have before us today. Primarily, I'm opposed to the measure's unclear wording that could easily lead to wide-ranging and serious consequences. This bill would prohibit discrimination, which is a good thing, on extremely hard-to-define measures such as an individual's perceived characteristics. I think it's the perception and the perceived language in here that is very troubling to me as a former small business owner with up to 15 employees. It'll be impossible for employers to operate a business while having to worry about being accused of mistreating someone based on the employee's perceived characteristics. This ill-conceived, vague language is nothing more than a golden ticket for America's trial lawyers. This loose wording is also an invitation for accusations by disgruntled employees who want to take advantage of a poorly constructed law. Like all of my colleagues, I believe congressional policies should strive to promote a tolerant society. I believe many members, including myself, would vote for it without the perception language in it. The gentleman from Massachusetts spoke before very eloquently, as he always does. And he said our laws should not say that gay people are bad people. That's not what this bill says, nor has any bill that's come before us ever said that. When people that I come in contact begin to disparage individuals who may be gay, I point out to them that, you don't know whether your Aunt Jen, your son Bill, your grandson Paul, or your granddaughter may be gay. So it's inappropriate.
I yield the gentlelady an additional 30 seconds.
Additional 30 seconds.
I thank the gentleman. It's inappropriate to make disparaging comments about anyone who is gay because people really don't know the people around them, whether they are or whether they're not. And it's really none of their business. However, when that quest for intolerance in this bill leads us to costly and irresponsible ends, I think we must rethink the legislation. At a time when America faces so many challenges, the last thing Congress needs to be doing is finding a way to hand trial lawyers an avalanche of litigation to cash in on. I urge my colleagues to oppose this poorly drafted legislation. Let's go back to the drafting board with this, and with that I yield the balance of my time.
The gentlelady from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding, Mr. Speaker. I am committed to the passage of an ENDA that protects lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender employees. I have been a lead sponsor of proposals like ENDA every year since I became a member of the New York State Assembly 30 years ago. And I'm a proud original co-sponsor of the original ENDA bill that would protect the entire LGBT community. I believe that civil rights are best advanced by bringing forward a bill that adequately protects all members of the LGBT community. While this may be risky, it is not reason to accept defeat before the fact and to leave behind members of the community who desperately need protection against employment discrimination. As we have seen in many states, the failure to include transgender people in civil rights legislation from the beginning makes it more difficult to extend protections later. My own state of New York, which enacted employment protections for lesbians and gays, has yet to extend these protections to the transgender community. The Senate has yet even to introduce its version of ENDA. Indeed, even if Congress were to adopt the non-inclusive ENDA, the President has already pledged to veto this legislation. So it is not a question, as the gentleman from Massachusetts said, of now choosing to protect a great number of people and leaving behind a smaller number of people as the price of so doing, because we cannot pass this legislation into law and protect anyone this year, unfortunately. We must look to the future when we have a president who will support equality. I believe it is important we take a principled stand now and speak with a strong and united voice for equal rights for all Americans, whether they are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, in order to maximize the chance that when we can enact an ENDA bill into law, it will be an inclusive bill that protects everyone's rights. And we must better educate lawmakers and the public about the issues of gender identity and expression. While I may disagree with some of my colleagues on strategy, I assure you that we are united in support of the ultimate goal: protection from employment discrimination for the entire LGBT community. No one should underestimate the strength of that common commitment of our dedication to seeing it realized. Transgender Americans, because of a lack of familiarity and understanding, are more likely to face employment discrimination and therefore more in need of protection from irrational discrimination that an inclusive ENDA would afford. And removing gender identity from ENDA may also leave lesbian and gay employees vulnerable to discrimination for failing to conform to gender stereotypes. In other words, some employers and courts may take an overly restrictive view that an exclusive ENDA fails to protect lesbians who appear, quote, too masculine, or, quote, or gay men who appear, quote, too effeminate. That is not our intent, nor do we believe that is an accurate reading of the bill, but congressional intent does not always carry the day. Splitting sexual orientation and gender identity, this serves the entire LGBT community and invites the kind of legal mischief that has undermined other civil rights laws. The fundamental issue is this: there are still too many places where it is entirely legal to discriminate against lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender employees. We must bring an end to this unfair, unacceptable, and un-American situation. Can I have an additional 30 seconds?
I'm sorry, we're limited for time.
When the House considers ENDA today, I will support the amendment introduced by Congresswoman Baldwin to restore the protections from discrimination based on gender identity. Should that amendment fail, I will not be able to vote for the underlying bill because it fails to uphold adequately the American values of fairness, equality, and inclusion. But I will continue to fight for a proper ENDA bill that includes all the people who need its help. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 5 minutes to a classmate of mine, a gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Souder.
Gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank my distinguished friend from Washington. Rather than comment generally on the bill here, I'm going to focus on the rule. I'll talk later on the bill itself. As a senior member of the Education Committee, we went through this debate in committee, and I find it reprehensible that the process we've been following increasingly in this House to shut off debate, ironically, in a bill that's supposedly expanding rights, we have another narrowly drawn rule that deprived me of offering several amendments I offered in committee, has a gerrymandered rule for another amendment that is unique in history, has several others put in the Rules Committee that are very unclear. And let me go through a number of these different amendments. I offered an amendment in committee that was unanimously opposed by the Democrats in committee to eliminate the word perceived. This is a legal nightmare. There is no other law. There's talk about how ADA has something vaguely familiar, but does not say perceived. That how in the world are you going to define perceived? That as anybody who has any friends who's worked with and been acquainted to people who have a homosexual lifestyle, they're all types. That this is an open-ended. There's no list here of what's perceived to be homosexual. How is an employer supposed to figure out whether it's perceived? Does that mean if he's a Christian and has made statements, somebody can file a suit because they perceived they were discriminated, not based on any kind of actions that occurred, but something that was perceived? This is a legal nightmare and a precedent that is absolutely terrible, and we can't even vote. We can't even have a vote to strike the word perceived and have a full debate on the word perceived. What kind of an open process is that in the House? I also had an amendment that would provide some protection for Christians who have strong views in the workplace. And we'll insert into the record at this point a number of cases. An AT&T employee was fired because they wouldn't sign a statement that contradicted his religious beliefs on accepting homosexual behavior. A man was fired at Red Cross for not participating in Gay and Lesbian Pride Month and forcing him to observe in that. Others have been fired for other reasons. The question is that not whether you can harass somebody in the workplace, that's already illegal. If you mock somebody, that's already illegal. If you commit a hate crime, that's already illegal. The question is, can you as a Christian express your views and not be persecuted? That yes, in a sense, it's at least a plurality of Americans profess Christianity, a smaller percent conservative Christianity, but we are moving so far as to restrict the rights in the workplace of Christians, even ability to hold or say anything about their views. People can't even have Bible studies in some places, it's been ruled, because that would be offensive to homosexuals in the workplace based on this law in some cities and have been upheld in the court. Now, the two amendments that were unanimously defeated in committee, and then we weren't allowed to debate as a whole House. We have an amendment that was added in response to another amendment from Pete Hoekstra in committee that would have exempted Christian colleges. It was unanimously defeated by the Democrats in committee. Then suddenly in the Rules Committee, we have it added with the religious exemption. The problem with the religious exemption, and here I would like to put into the record a number of cases that show the problem with this. Loyola University was deprived the religious exemption because even though it was founded by Jesuits, its charter requires its president to be a Jesuit, and more than 1/3 of the trustees, they were denied because they didn't meet one of those criteria. That a Friends school, a Quaker school, was denied a religious exemption because it was had to have multiple proof that everybody there was Quaker and was following every rule. A private religious school was denied for similar type things. A business that wanted to run as a religious worldview was clearly denied the religious exemption. An orphanage by the United Methodist Church was denied the ability because it had gone secular. They wanted to come back and be Methodist Church again, and they were denied because they followed the, these are all court decisions, denied because of they were no longer purely Methodists and they didn't have a right to go back and be Methodist. This is in addition to the 2,500 Christian bookstores in America. Only 14% are run by a church. 86% are either for-profit or not predominantly religious organizations. Under this bill, they will be forced to hire homosexuals regardless of the personal views of Christian bookstores. This is going to happen in various independent organizations that are quasi part of the church. Sometimes the church will operate a for-profit entity that runs as a for-profit entity that would not be predominantly a religious purpose, but the proceeds go to the church, therefore they will implement their church beliefs in it, even though it's a for-profit entity. None of that is exempted under this. We didn't even get a chance to debate this amendment. It just came in the rule. I'd ask for 2 additional minutes.
Bill, gentlemen, 2 additional minutes.
Additional minutes.
Now we move to another amendment that suddenly appeared, or I guess we'll be debating here on marriage, somehow in response to the debate in committee, that they're saying that this won't affect the Defense of Marriage Act. This is another lawsuit amendment because that's directly contrary to the fundamental part of the bill. My amendment tries to address part of this, but quite frankly, it's a legal quagmire. Then we come to the amendments that are allowed. We've had some debate on this gender equity for transgender and transvestites. Now, the challenge here is not whether you favor it or against it. I heard my friend from New York say he was going to vote for it. He can't vote for it. We're not allowed to vote for it. We have been banned from having the debate. What happened to the day when we have a debate, you win or lose, to come in unprecedented? I have never heard, as a staff or a member, a rule coming in prohibiting in the rule a vote. This is a in-your-face tactic as part of this bill to not let us debate the religious underpinnings and the religious stuff, not debate perceived, not debate protections for people who are individual, not have a vote on transgender, and it's 5 minutes on each side to even debate it. This is an abominable rule. It is a precedent-setting, terrible, terrible rule, and I urge people to support my colleagues, Mr. Hastings' motion on a previous question, and to vote against that so we can have some amendments to this rule and then vote against this abominable rule because it sets precedents we will regret for a long, long time, no matter which party is in the majority. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back to the gentlelady from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act is sensitive to religious organizations and our fundamental religious beliefs and tenets, and it includes a very broad religious exemption. In fact, we are going to debate later on the Miller Amendment that, if adopted, would make clear that ENDA exempts the same group of religious organizations that are currently exempt from the prohibition on religious discrimination under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now, we know not every employer will agree that gay people should be protected from employment discrimination. But for the betterment and advancement of our society as a whole, ENDA would overrule that judgment so that Americans are treated fairly and equally. But nothing in ENDA or in any civil rights law that has come before us in the history of this country affects the ability, the God-given right of a person to hold contrary beliefs based on religion or otherwise. And at this time, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Kucinich.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, this is one of those moments where the House gets to demonstrate the degree to which we are truly committed to the unfolding of 14th Amendment rights to due process and equal protection of the law. We get a chance to determine that today. And I believe that people who happen to be gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgendered are entitled to the full and equal protection of employment laws. The principles behind the original draft of ENDA sought to embrace the fullness of a community which has experienced significant undermining of rights in the workplace. None of us can know unless we've walked in somebody's shoes. But let's imagine for a moment that someone who presents himself or herself as being of another sex or gender, imagine what they must go through in their daily lives. And imagine we who take an oath to defend the Constitution would somehow separate those people from the claims of justice, from the claims of constitutional protection. We all love this country. We all love being Americans. But to be an American means really standing for those constitutional principles and really understanding that life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness are something that everyone should have access to and that everyone should have equal protection of the law and due process. I'm very concerned as my Republican colleagues are, that the Baldwin Amendment can be offered and pulled back without a vote. Because if it was given a vote, I would vote for the Baldwin Amendment. And I'm very, excuse me, my time has expired.
And I'll yield myself 30 seconds. The gentleman yield.
So I was saying that I share the concern that my Republican colleagues have that we won't have a chance to vote on the Baldwin Amendment because I believe that this is not a Republican or Democrat issue.
Reclaiming my time, because I often give the gentleman time to hopefully respond to what I am going to suggest, and that is if he would vote no on the previous question, then that would be to amend the rule to allow a vote under normal rules, normal order. So if you would join me in voting no on the previous question, then you'll have an opportunity to vote on that amendment.
Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the newest member from Georgia, Mr. Brown.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, today I rise to speak against H.R. 3685, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, and the restrictive, undemocratic, and authoritarian rule that the majority party has put before us today. Now, Mr. Speaker, I realize that I'm one of the newest members of the House of Representatives, having been sworn in just 3 months ago. But I recognize a totalitarian regime when I see one. In my short tenure here, the Democratic majority has made a mockery of the democratic process. And today's rule is a perfect example. For you good folks at home, this is what's happening in a nutshell. The Democrats sprung this bill on us that will grant special employment privileges and a protected minority status to anyone who defines themselves by their sexual orientation. But that's not all. They gave us less than 24 hours. Yes, less than 24 hours notice that this bill would be on the floor, because when the schedule for this week was set last Friday, it made no mention of this discriminatory bill. And for good reason. They don't want the American people to realize that they are undermining America's religious liberties in the House of Representatives. But they didn't stop there. Then the Democratic majority decided to rig the process to block Republican amendments to even slightly improve this terrible and unfortunate bill. An authoritarian regime right here in the House of Representatives, otherwise known as the Democratic majority. I will vote against this rule, and I urge my colleagues to do so. I yield back.
The gentlelady from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, this time I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from New York, an outspoken advocate for equality for all Americans, Ms. Maloney.
Gentlelady from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise in strong support of the underlying bill and the Baldwin Amendment. INDA will offer real protections to tens of millions of Americans now. Right now, far too many workers go to work every day fearing that they could be fired on the spot, no questions asked, if their employer discovered their sexual orientation. This year, it is legal in 30 states to fire someone simply because he or she is gay, lesbian, or trans, or bisexual. Hard-working, tax-paying Americans shouldn't be forced into the shadows, and they should not have to live with the constant, legitimate fear that they could lose their jobs. That is why I strongly support providing protection from discrimination to transgender Americans, and I will not rest until their right to live their lives free of fear, discrimination, and intolerance is the law of this land. But I know from my years on the City Council, where we worked to pass similar legislation, and my years in the women's movement, that we need to make history now and pass the underlying bill and protect people here in America now.
Gentleman from Washington.
I reserve my time, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from Florida.
Please to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, another outspoken advocate of equality for all Americans, Mr. Holt.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, as a strong supporter of inclusive ENDA, that provides employment protections for sexual orientation as well as gender identity. I'm an original co-sponsor of the original ENDA that was introduced earlier this year, the legislation we should be taking up today. In my home state of New Jersey, we're proud to have a fully inclusive employment non-discrimination law. We're proud of the New Jersey-based businesses that have corporate policies against discrimination based on gender identity in addition to sexual orientation. Companies such as Johnson & Johnson, Merck, and Prudential Financial prohibit employment discrimination based on gender identity, not only because they believe it's the right thing to do morally and ethically, but also they know it's a matter of corporate competitiveness and good for their companies. Our distinguished colleague, John Lewis, often reminds us of the words of Dr. King that the time is always right to do the right thing. And Dr. King warned us against the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. I'm concerned that when we break apart legislation, some pieces fall on the floor to get swept into the dustbin of history or to be considered only years later. We should not do this to members of our society who need and deserve the same protections as all other Americans. I want to thank the members of Garden State Equality, New Jersey Stonewall Democrats, the New Jersey Lesbian and Gay Coalition for their hard work and tireless efforts for inclusive protections. And I ask unanimous consent, Mr. Speaker, to include in the record a letter from Johnson & Johnson Company supporting an inclusive ENDA bill and a copy of a statement of dissent by Representatives Clark, Kucinich, Sanchez, and me in the committee markup of this legislation.
Souder.
And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I continue to yield or reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, this time I yield 1 minute to Mr. Weiner from New York.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentlelady. You know, I'm waiting for some conservatives to come to the floor. I'm waiting for some true intellectually consistent conservative members of the other party who understand that in their mantra of government staying out of people's private lives, in their mantra of allowing the marketplace to work, allowing people to be judged by their hard work, by their tenacity, by their skill, I'm waiting for those people to come to the floor and say that we believe in ENDA. We believe in the idea of not government selecting who's going to win, but letting the marketplace do it. We believe in our friends in the private sector, 350 or so Fortune 500 companies that already practice ENDA that we're going to be voting on today. Where are they? Where are those members of my colleague's party that are shamed by their record on civil rights throughout the years and want to make it right now? Where are the members of that party who are going to come forward and say, I don't want to explain to my grandkids why I was on the wrong side of another civil rights movement? Where are those members of that party who claim to be conservative? Speak up now. This is your moment.
Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I continue to reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2.5 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, our distinguished chairman of the Education and Labor Subcommittee on Health, Employment, Labor, and Pensions, a member who has been outspoken in his fight against discrimination for all Americans, Mr. Andrews.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 2.5 minutes. Without objection, so ordered.
I thank my friend for yielding. I rise in support of the rule. I want to emphasize a point of agreement and a point of disagreement. There is a broad and growing agreement that members of the transgender community should receive the full protection of the federal law. And many of us are committed to work to achieve that day as soon as we possibly can. But there's a strong point of disagreement that I've heard from the minority side about the procedure on which we are taking up this bill. You know, we had a vigorous debate in the full committee about this bill, and 3 concerns were raised. One was the issue of the transgender community, and Ms. Baldwin has an order, an amendment, which she will decide the disposition of, so that issue can be raised. Second is the scope of the religious exemption, which my friends vigorously debated. And Mr. Miller and Mr. Stupak's manager's amendment raises that very same issue, and there will be a debate and there will be a disposition. And finally, there was some discussion as to the impact of this bill on the question of the definition of marriage.
And the amendment of Mr. Miller and Mr. Stupak will make in order a debate and a disposition of that issue as well. The purpose of the House, with all due respect to my friends on the other side, the purpose of the House is not to debate every issue for as long as it takes till everyone's done talking. The purpose of the House is to have a fair and reasonable proceeding and to decide. And that is what we're going to do here. And I would just say one final thing to my friend, and I know he's going to ask me to yield. I will do so if he agrees to yield to me when my time has expired. But my friend speaks with great enthusiasm for bringing to a vote on the floor the question of transgender people. I would ask my friend why for the previous 12 years that his group has had the majority here, that they never brought the issue to the floor during those 12 years if they have such intense feelings in favor. I'd be happy to yield to my friend.
Well, I thank the gentleman for yielding. I'd probably respond to your direct question for the same reason that for the 20 years prior to that, your party didn't bring it up either. But what I would want to say, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. The gentleman said that the purpose of the House is not to debate every issue. I would tend to agree with that. But I think that the gentleman would have to agree with me that when there are propositions that are made in order, whether it's a bill or whether it's an amendment, that ought to be debated on and disposed of. I yield myself 30 seconds.
Tell me yield.
And at least ought to be disposed of by the House and not be covered up, if you will, by a rule. I'll yield to the gentleman.
If the gentleman will yield, the majority will have a chance to work its will. The House will have a chance to work its will on his proposition, and we will make a majority decision, and he will either win or lose, which I think is fair within the rules. I yield back to my
reclaiming my time. I'm glad the gentleman would do that. I hope he would join me. I'm just worried that this is so unprecedented for this to happen. That's the point I made from the outset. That's the point I make right now. With that, I reserve my time.
Gentlelady from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I'm the last speaker from my side, so I'll reserve my time until it is my turn to close.
Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House to now adjourn.
The question is on the motion.